Hello, 2360 students. I hope everyone had a great long Labor Day weekend. Hopefully, you got a little chance to relax. I know this is a very busy semester. So, I wanted to start off discussing the inclusive practices field work and that assignment and the pieces that go along with it because you will be in a classroom and you will be observing and you will be working with children. But aside from completing your 12 hours, you are also responsible for some other pieces that encompass that whole project. So I wanted to do an overview, but also I will be making more than one video. That way we can break this into different sections or parts. I feel like that will be easier and not overwhelm you. I will be doing this fairly quickly because I want you to kind of move along and get this completed. So the first thing I want to show you is how to get to the inclusive practices field work. Now, if you watched my welcome video, I kind of went over how it was laid out, but I know that a lot has happened since then. We've slept since then. We've got a lot of information coming at us. So I thought I would go back to that and let you know how to get to it. So, one of the main projects you're going to have in this course, aside from your case study work, is going to be your inclusive practices fieldwork. So, yes, you will be completing hours inside of a fieldwork placement and early childhood setting. Aside from that, you have some pieces that you will have to complete, some parts that will make up your entire assignment. So, half of your assignment's going to be being in the classroom, but you will be also doing some things that you will be submitting as part of that field work. So, what you do to get to it is underneath content. This is where all of our content for the course is going to be. So when you click on content, on the left-hand side, you're going to see a table of contents. This is the easiest way to navigate through the course. All of your material will be here, your assignments, your quizzes, your reading, everything is listed under content. So underneath the Getting Started module, you're going to see Inclusive Practices Fieldwork. You should click on that. It already began when the class opened, so this has been open the entire time. So hopefully you've had a chance to kind of browse through it and read a little bit about what you're going to be doing this semester. If not, I strongly encourage you to do that. So you're going to see two documents underneath the Inclusive Practices Fieldwork module. The first one is going to be the assignment itself, and the second one is going to be kind of like a checklist for you to make sure you've got all your ducks in a row. So I wanted to go over the fieldwork guidelines and checklist first because this is one of the most important pieces. This is how you are going to be able to get okay to be placed. So when you click on it, is this what you're going to see? So, since this is a Tennessee eCampus course, you are responsible for your own placement. And what that means is that you are going to have to make sure that you are placed in an early childhood setting and that to make sure it's going to be the right setting, but there's some things you have to do before you can be approved. Now, even though you're responsible for your own placement, I still have to okay and double check that you've done what you said you've done. Incomplete checklist, will result in no placement, meaning if you don't complete these things on this checklist, you will not be placed. Now, one thing I did want to preface right away is that students who do not complete field work will not pass this course. Field work is a requirement for this course, so please keep that in mind. So if you see here, this is the list of things that you're going to have to get done. You will have to complete a TBI background check at your own expense. Now, if you've been in other early childhood courses, you've had practicums, you've had some kind of field work that you've had to complete. Now, a background check here at Water State, we only accept background checks for 1 calendar year. So let's say last January or this past January, January 2025, you got a background check for your work, okay? So or a course. So it's still good as of now this semester because it's good for 1 calendar year. So it'll start in January 25 and then it will expire the next January 2026. So 1 calendar year it's good for. If you've had a background check, say you are working for a school system or early childhood site or a daycare, whatever it is, and they required you to have a background check, it's still only good for 1 year. So if it's been past a year, you need to go ahead and get another background check completed. You will also have to purchase liability insurance. Now, there's a few different ways that you can purchase it. Some school systems, your institution, your home institution will allow students to purchase insurance. So that's one way, like example, at Walter State Community College, we have something called AON insurance. And what that does, it provides insurance for our students, our education students, to go in and it'll cover them in the classroom for 2 semesters, so an academic year or a semester, depending on if they only purchase it in the spring. So that just covers them while they're doing their placement or their field work or practicums. So some institutions offer that. If not, you could obviously purchase it through NAEYC. That is one. If you're not specifically in work with littles and say you want to work with K2, you can also purchase insurance through STEA, which is Student Teacher Education Association, which falls under TEA, Teacher Education Association. So there's a few options for you to purchase liability insurance. And if you're confused, obviously you can check with the early childhood coordinator at your school, or you can also check in with me and I'll be glad to help you. But you have to have liability insurance. Also, after you get your liability insurance, you've got your background check, you will have to complete what we call the placement referral confirmation form. Now, you'll notice that the liability insurance is not in there, the background check is not in there because it's your responsibility to have these things completed. But I will be sending out once you have your background check and your liability insurance in place. I need to have the proof of that, obviously. There's a place in the course underneath Dropbox or the assignments Dropbox for you to put that proof. Like you'll upload an image and submit it. I will then send you a referral confirmation form. This is just a form that wherever you're wanting to get placed, that early childhood coordinator for that site or that school, the principal, wherever you're at, they will sign off. So will the teacher that's going to be mentoring you will sign off saying, yes, I agree that person can be in my classroom, and you'll upload that to our assignment Dropbox. Now, as you're going through this process, I still want you to work with your own institution's early childhood coordinator to ensure that you are complying with these guidelines, right? So it would be good for you to reach out at the very start. This is what's tricky when you take Tennessee campus courses and you're not taking this through your own, for whatever reason that you're not taking this course in your own institution, maybe they don't offer it at the same time that you're going to have it so you can graduate and it's not messing up with your schedule. Whatever the reason is, this is unfortunate for you because these are things that we have to do because you're not at Walter State taking this. This is through Tennessee campus. So I do want to apologize for that. It's a little bit more difficult as you're having to secure and make sure you're doing what you're supposed to do. But I am still here to help you and guide you. So don't think I'm going to throw you out in the deep end and leave you there. Okay. I am supporting you because I am your instructor, but I still want you to work with your institution's coordinator, early childhood coordinator, because they're familiar with this process. So I just put a checklist here to make sure that you are following this. You can schedule and complete the TBI background check. Um, if you need help with that, please reach out to me. Again, you can reach out to me or the early childhood coordinator. You have to have permission from me, the instructor, um, to complete all these before I give you the placement confirmation form. Okay. Um, After that, once those two things are submitted, you emailed me, I will email you the confirmation referral form. That's why I didn't put it in there because I want you to follow the steps first. Then you submit that. Now look here. Your referral confirmation form is due by October 23rd, and I still think that's pushing it. I put it out as far as I could. I highly suggest you do not wait that long because I know you're thinking 12 hours is not that long, but the assignment for the whole entire assignment for fieldwork is due in November. That doesn't give us a lot of time. Okay, if you do any of these things and you begin your hours before I have proof of liability, before you've done your background check and I have proof, and before you get the referral confirmation form, if I haven't given you the green light and you go in and start doing your hours, those hours will not count. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Now remember, in addition to going in the classroom and doing your 12 hours, you must also complete your fieldwork assignment. Okay, it's part of your fieldwork hours. So this is going to include, and we'll go over this in the video, this is going to be including conducting a observation, okay, using a qualitative inclusive practices checklist. You are going to interview your mentor teacher, and you're really focusing on those inclusive practices. You're going to submit in that same project a written reflection analysis based on your interview and your observation. And then you're also going to be completing an advocacy letter component as part of this assignment. All of this will be submitted to the assignment Dropbox by the required deadline. Now remember, again, you have to complete not only your hours, but these components here as well. Okay, so make sure you read over everything. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Now, I want to go ahead and go over the overview and go into part one. Now, I will be doing more than one video. I don't want to make a 2-hour video. Obviously, it wouldn't take that long, but I don't want to make an extremely long video. I think it's better to break it up into chunks. Um, so I'm going to go over the overview and then I'll go into the first part and then I'll let you simmer on that. And then next week I'll do another part. So I just think that'll be the easiest thing. Now, you will click on Inclusive Practices Fieldwork, as I mentioned, to get the actual assignment. Okay, so you'll see here, this is actually what we call a key assessment. And what that means is through my institution, our early childhood program is accredited by NAEYC. And because of that, we have a lot of rigor in our courses and we have to do key assessments. So this is a key assessment through NAEYC and our accreditation. And this assignment is going to allow you to go above and beyond just doing observation hours in a classroom, more than just field work. So we're really going to examine, as an early childhood professional, um, are we able to implement and create those inclusive environments for young children? And what does that actually look like? Okay, so not only will this assignment allow you to observe and analyze and reflect, but you're also going to learn how to be an advocate for early learning setting for those children. Okay, so I mentioned something called the qualitative inclusive practices checklist. So, what a quality inclusive practices checklist is an instrument, and what it does is it allows you to really assess a classroom. So, this was really developed to look at both equity and inclusion. Okay, so this was a project that was supported by the U.S. Department of Education as well as the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP. And again, when we say inclusive practices, we want to make sure that you're familiar with these three things, right? These are the three key features of inclusive classrooms. We're looking at access. Okay, so how is environment set up for children and for all children to participate? We're looking at participation. Okay, so what's the engagement look like between peers, peer to peer, or children and adults engaging with peers and students? Like, how is the learning? So, what does the participation look like in engagement? And then, lastly, supports. So, this is really looking at that professional level and system level, the school wide or district wide, depending on your site placement. And what we do with those three parts is we're not really, I don't want you to look at it as you're trying to judge the site you're in. I want you to look at that you're looking for these three quality things, right? And this is based on evidence-based indicators, this checklist is, and it's going to help you measure these three things. Okay, so you're going to be doing the QIPC to gather evidence, right, in this setting that you're in. So that's part of it. Now, that's the observation part. So, when you're doing this, I will tell you it's good to take notes, right? Document, give examples, illustrate, and I'm going to give you guided questions to help you on that process to make sure that you're looking for those three things: access, participation, and supports. So, you're really, when we're in there and we're doing our 12 hours and you are observing, you shouldn't really focus on you shouldn't focus just on the whole site, right? It also should include observation of a child who is diagnosed with a disability in the site. So, looking at that child, their experience with the environment, access, their experiment with engaging in learning activities, their peers and teacher, and their experience with support that they get from not only the professional level, the teachers, but the system level, like the family support as well, in how that school or that site supports the family. So that's the things I want you to take away. You're not just doing the whole classroom. I want you to look at it in the eyes of a child who has a disability. Now, in addition to doing the QIPC checklist for the observation component, you will also be doing an interview. So you will conduct a brief interview with a classroom teacher or assistant teacher to the site, because when we have teacher assistants, we know they are basically the second teacher. Really, the purpose of this interview is for you to gain insight into that program's inclusion, right? Their approach to inclusion. What are the strategies they're using? Are there resources available to that child and family? These components are really going to help you evaluate the classroom um, and what it means to be inclusive in that classroom specifically. And are they engaging and supporting the child? Is the child having engaging experiences? Are they having meaningful learning experiences? And really, this approach is what we call an evidence based approach. This really lets us look at inclusion as a whole and what does it look like in practice instead of just talking or reading about it. So once you've done your QIPC checklist, once you've completed your teacher interview, then you're going to take those notes, your interview notes, and your QIPC checklist. Okay, there's a summary form for you provided. You're going to be able to answer some questions, right? Where you're going to include examples of the things that you're seeing that are what we call effective practices, right? And you're going to summarize that. So you're going to do like a written reflection where you're going to analyze the things that you learned about inclusive teaching strategies you've seen, looking at your own practice, right? And thinking about how all that could advocate for children in an inclusive environment. Okay, so here's the assignment as a snapshot, right? So we're going to have 5 parts. The first part is going to be a written reflection that demonstrates your understanding of developmental, diverse, cultural, linguistic context, professional ethics, and your role as a advocate for inclusion. The second part is what I've talked about a little bit, which is the observation in the teacher interview. The third part is going to be what I just mentioned a minute ago, which was analyzing and summarizing those inclusive practices, which was using the QIPC summary form as well as conducting your interview. The fourth part is your reflection, right? So after you've done all these things, you're going to write a reflective part about inclusive teaching practices. And lastly, you're going to write a professional letter, which is addressed to a legislator or policymaker advocating for policies that support inclusive practices in early childhood education. Now, each component builds upon one another. Okay, so each component is designed to build on the previous one, which means that this is going to encompass the whole of what we mean it by an inclusive environment and supporting young children. This assignment addresses the NAEYC professional standards and competencies. So we're looking at child development and learning in context. Standard 3, child observation assessment and assessment. Standard 4, developmentally, culturally, and linguistically appropriate teaching practices. Standard 6, professionalism as an early childhood educator. Okay, so that's overview. That's the assignment, okay, with your 12 hours. Now I want to look at part 1A and part 1B. Okay. I will do short videos for the rest of them. The first video is going to be the longest because I had to do the overview. But let's look at part 1A first. So part 1A is really going to be preparing. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, before you can do your interview, right? Before you can do your observation, you need to review the quality inclusive practices checklist. I always refer to it as the QIPC because that's a mouthful, right? And you also need to review the relevant NAEYC professional standards and competencies, as well as the NAEYC Code of Ethics for Early Childhood Educators. Now, these are just resources, and they're really going to help you deepen your understanding of inclusive practices. Some of us are not familiar working with children who have exceptionalities. Okay, so when we're looking at inclusive practices, this is going to be a supportive environment for all children. So, what do we mean by that? Well, we're looking at all developmental domains: physical, cognitive, social, emotional, linguistic, diverse cultural and linguistic contexts. So, those are encompassing what we see when we say inclusive practices. Now, before you observe, like I said, you're going to review those three things. And then you are going to write a summary. Now, your summary doesn't have to be really, really long. It's only going to be a half a page to 1 page. Now, I gave you some prompts that I really want you to think about and focus on when you're writing your summary. You're going to identify the key components of a high quality inclusion in QIPC, focusing on access, participation, and supports. Okay. Remember, when we say diverse abilities, we're talking about children who have all ability levels, okay? All languages, all backgrounds. You're going to describe typical and atypical development for the age of the focus of your child. So, whatever school system or site or placement or age level you're working with, that's where you should focus. And think about the family, right? Their culture, their family, their values, their language. Think about all those things when you're describing typical and atypical development based on those children. And then you're going to explain how inclusive learning, early learning environments will provide supportive, responsive, appropriate, right, opportunities for children. Why I say appropriate and put that in there is because, again, going back to that age level, recognizing their individual needs, and it's going to vary depending on that child. Okay, we want to make sure our classrooms have a sense of belonging, right? Because again, that's part of our position statement on inclusion where we're talking about NAEYC and DEC. Okay, now that's the first part. You're doing that summary. The second part of part one, which is 1B, is you have to reflect on professional identity and ethical responsibilities. Okay, so what is your role as an early childhood educator? So, this is really going to help set the tone for your observing and documentation. So, what you need to do is again, half page to 1 page, depending on, you got to have at least half a page. You're going to review the standards 6A and 6B and the code. And I put exactly what you needed to be looking at. Paying close attention to those core values, right, and principles. This is related specifically to inclusion, fairness, and professionalism. Okay, think about this as more than a review task. You are required to summarize, not required to summarize the standards, but I do want you to be able to explain this to someone in the classroom, and you as a teacher should know these things, right? Because you're early childhood educator. So it's a review task, yes, but for your own benefit, I'm not asking you to summarize this in this part, obviously, but I want you to know these things. And then look at professional identity and your specific role as being an advocate, okay, for inclusive practices. Why is it important to speak up on behalf of diverse learners and support policies and practices to promote belonging and opportunity? And you'll see here, everything I'm putting is connecting back to a standard or competency through NAEYC. Look at your ethical responsibilities, right? What is your responsibilities ethically as an early childhood educator? What are your responsibilities? Looking again at fairness, respect, support for the child and families, all the children in your room. And then lastly, ethics and advocacy and practices. We're going to really explain how these principles and your role as an advocacy or advocate will guide your observation and your documentation. Okay, describe your professional values, your responsibilities, and how they're going to shape when you observe, the language you're going to use, how you objectively and respectfully describe children's actions and interactions. Okay, so this first section again is just to prepare and for you to gain a deeper understanding or a clear understanding of child development, specifically when we're talking about your ethical and professional responsibilities. Okay, these two summaries are going to be revisited again in your final reflection, your part 5. So you're going to come full circle and we're going to look back at those. So I'm this whole assignment again is building upon itself. So this is just the first part. Now, the second part is going to be, I will go over this real quick because I did touch on it in the overview and it's also a big part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. And then we'll leave the last 3 parts for maybe another video or two. So the second part is where you're going to conduct the observation and teacher interview. So you're going to use the Quality Inclusive Practices Checklist, the QIPC, and you're going to use 2 data collecting methods. You're going to use direct child observation and teacher interview. Okay, that's that A and B we talked about. Your goal is really to use documentation, but it needs to be reflective and an accurate assessment, right? So we need to capture both the visible elements, but also we're looking at the professional insights, things that you're gaining by talking to your teacher or they share things. So it's one thing for you just to go in and do the observation and use that QIP checklist, but it's another thing for you to get the teacher's insights. That's why we put that interview component in there. So again, the observation is really to help you look at the access, participation, engagement, all of those things. Um, and the QIPC checklist is included in this whole document. Okay, you'll have to scroll down, but you will be using that, right? So here's a confidential reminder when you're doing this observation. You have to use a pseudonym, a fictitious name for the child, the teacher, and peers. You cannot break confidentiality. I do not want to know their names. You can make up a name, you could use their initials. I don't care who it is, but I do not want to know. Okay, we do not include identifying information, so please be cautious of that when you are doing your QIPC summary. Now, in connection to the observation and QIPC, you have to use your notes. So as you observe, connect your notes to the QIPC indicators. And again, it's at the back of this, at the bottom of this document. Look at your notes for access, participation, and supports. Try to include concrete examples that you're seeing and illustrate how these are connected to the indicators and how the indicators are implemented for that focus child. So remember, it's good for you when you're doing this observation, lean on one child. Look at one child that has a disability and you're going to that's going to help you with your QIPC. Okay, and I mentioned that above, you need to find a child that has a disability or exceptionality because you're going to be using that for your summary and while you're doing your observation using this tool, this instrument tool, the QIPC. Now, when you're doing your observation, that's part of it, but you have to use what we call narrative writing. So this is a requirement. Your observation should be written in a narrative form rather than bullet points. So don't do just like I did here with these questions. I want it in narrative writing. So you can use more describing more in detail, right? And you should include like the teacher and child interactions, interactions with other peers, their language, any more details that you can give is a better idea. It gives me a clearer picture of what's going on in the classroom. Now, I did include some guided questions here, some areas I want you to focus on. So these are the areas again that we're focusing on when you're doing your observation and you write your narrative. Now, let me go back real quick just so there's no misunderstandings, and I'll keep telling you this to remind you. When you do your observation, you are using the QIPC checklist. When you write your summary, right, you're using these these focus areas and guiding questions. They have to be answered in your narrative. Okay, so you're going to focus on teacher-child relationship, peer interaction support, emotional and behavioral support, as well as child engagement and participation. I have questions under these guiding questions under each area, each focus area is going to really help you with your narrative, right? And then also looking at those indicators. So here's what might be easiest. And it's it's easy for you to kind of get overwhelmed because there's a lot of pieces to this. What I would do is take this assignment with you and let your mentor teacher look at the QIPC checklist, which they should be familiar with. So use the QIP checklist, but make notes as you're doing it, because those notes, and have these questions up too with you. That way you can go back and connect your notes with this. Okay. So that's my suggestion to you. And again, if you're getting through this and if something is kind of not clicking or you're confused and you need clarifications, please feel free to reach out. Now, the second part is your interview. This is really going to help you get a better understanding aside of just doing a QIPC checklist, right? We want to gain teacher insight. So your interview really opens up that window to not only like their planning, but looking at how they make decisions and that reflective process of what it takes to be an inclusive teacher or using inclusive practices. So your observation will capture what you see in the moment, but your interview reveals why certain practices are used. So it's going to kind of like close that gap for you to get the inside behind of why they are doing this. How are they developed? And how do they connect to collaboration, assessments, and individual support? Okay, so this is really that bridge um, to what you see to the experts guiding it in the background, right? So that's why we do that, for that bridge piece. So when you conduct this interview, remember, it could be with the classroom teacher or it could be with a teaching assistant in the classroom. Really, your focus is going to help you understand deeply about inclusive practices. And you have to prepare your questions in advance. Okay. Now, what you're going to be asking them is going to be on focus area using questions below. Okay. So make sure you have them ahead of time. Take accurate, detailed notes. So when you write, okay, so here's the questions. We got the interview focus areas, the guided questions, inclusive teaching practices, collaboration with families and colleagues, assessment practices, and also support for individual children. Um, when you're doing your summary or narrative, make sure that you use full narrative form, no bullet points. Anytime they have direct quotes, integrate that into there. That way we can have that teacher's voice. Remember, you're connecting your interview to what you observed with using your QIPC checklist. And anytime you're identifying anything from the checklist, the QIPC I indicators, um, provide that with it in the teacher's statement for evidence in your narrative. And then when you're using the checklist, okay, I put something down here to help you with data collection. If you are writing, right, and you're using the checklist, make sure that you read the checklist first before you do the observation. For observation indicators, it's an O. For interview, it's an I. That's going to help us when we guide our data collection, okay, or guide the data collection for you. So for observation, make sure you provide objective, specific evidence, things that you want to see and hear in the environment, okay, that supports your yes or no responses. And be sure you describe the child's actual engagement. Okay, so that's where we say detailed notes help. And then for interview indicators, again, you've got that I for interview. You can include direct quotes, paraphrasing, from your teacher, like comments they make. Maybe they explain to you their practices or strategies, any kind of collaborative approaches that they're using. Anything that's not immediately visible to you in your observation, like planning, assessment, partnerships, professional support, those can be recorded during the teacher's input on the interview, which is your I section. So remember, it's if it's observation, it's O. If it's interview, it's I. And we have the questions there to help you. Okay, that's enough for you right now. I'm not going to go any further. We'll do a separate video, which will start our part 3 because I feel like that's a lot of information for one time. Now, I do have the QIPC summary form here. I'm going to talk about, again, we'll go back and reflect on that. But here is the form for you to look at. And I told you that the QIPC checklist is down here. There's also the rubric, okay, which we'll go over in a separate video. But I want you to look at that. But if you scroll kind of all the way down toward the bottom, you're going to see the summary form. Okay, that's going to help you with your narrative. Okay, again, there's those 3 areas, the strengths and the challenges. And then there's the actual checklist, which is what you're going to be using for your observation, the O section. Okay, and it breaks it again into those 3 areas. All right. The next video, I'll go over and review this again before getting into part 3 because I didn't want to like make it too much, but go ahead and make sure that you watch it and read through the entire assignment and reach out if you have any questions. All right, I hope you have a fabulous week. Remember, this is starting our first work of our module work and our first part of the case study. All right, until next time, take care.